The morning sun blazed over the NATO training facility in Poland. Dust clouds swirled across the massive compound as military vehicles roared past concrete buildings. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the main field, her hands clasped behind her back. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a black jacket, and worn boots. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged among the hundreds of elite soldiers preparing for joint military exercises. A group of Navy SEALs gathered near the equipment shed, their voices carrying across the field. They noticed the woman standing alone and began whispering among themselves. Staff Sergeant Jake Torres nudged his teammate and pointed in her direction. "Who's the tourist?" Torres asked with a smirk. "Did someone's girlfriend get lost on base?" The other SEALs chuckled. They were used to being the toughest operators on any field. Their black uniforms and tactical gear marked them as America's finest special forces. The woman looked completely out of place among the chaos of military preparation. Lieutenant Marcus Webb joined the group, adjusting his rifle strap. "Maybe she's a journalist. You know how they love to write stories about us heroes," he said mockingly. The men laughed louder. Sarah heard their comments, but remained perfectly still. Her green eyes scanned the horizon as if she was searching for something only she could see. Years of training had taught her to stay calm under pressure. She had faced much worse than a few cocky soldiers making jokes. Major Anderson, the exercise coordinator, approached the group with his clipboard. "Gentlemen, we have a new addition to today's training scenario. She'll be observing our operations." He glanced toward Sarah without much interest. "Observing?" Torres raised an eyebrow. "Sir, with respect, this is advanced combat training. We're simulating hostage rescue in enemy territory. It's not exactly a place for civilians." Anderson shrugged. "Orders came from the top. She has clearance. Just focus on your mission." He walked away before anyone could ask more questions. The SEALs exchanged glances. They had worked with female soldiers before and respected many of them. But this woman didn't look like military. She seemed too calm, too quiet. In their experience, civilians on military bases were usually nervous or excited. This one appeared bored. As the morning progressed, different units arrived for the exercise. British SAS soldiers in their distinctive gear took positions near the western perimeter. German KSK operators checked their weapons by the armored vehicles. French commandos studied maps under a camouflage tent. Elite forces from 12 nations had gathered for this massive training operation. Sarah watched each group with careful attention. She noticed how they moved, how they communicated, how they organized their equipment. Her mind automatically cataloged their strengths and weaknesses. Old habits never died. "Check out the spy," whispered Corporal Davis, another SEAL. "She's watching everyone like she's taking notes for the enemy." Webb laughed. "Maybe she's planning to write a book. How I spent my summer vacation with real soldiers." The group found this hilarious. Their commanding officer, Commander James Harrison, was busy reviewing mission parameters with other unit leaders. Harrison was a legend in special operations circles. He had led successful missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. His men respected him completely. They also knew he had little patience for distractions during important training. The exercise scenario was complex. Terrorist actors had taken hostages in a mock embassy building. Multiple entry points needed to be secured simultaneously. Air support would provide cover while ground teams moved in. Each national unit had specific objectives to prevent overlap and confusion. Sarah understood the setup immediately. She had participated in similar operations many times before, though under very different circumstances. The NATO planners had done good work, but she could spot several tactical problems they had missed. At noon, the units gathered for final briefings. Sarah remained on the sidelines, still drawing curious stares and whispered comments. A group of Italian Marines pointed at her and made jokes in their native language. Spanish paratroopers wondered aloud why a civilian was allowed so close to classified operations. The British SAS captain, a stern man named Thompson, approached Major Anderson. "Sir, I need to express concern about the unauthorized observer. My men are asking questions." Anderson looked tired. "Captain, she has the highest level clearance. That's all I can tell you." "From which agency?" Thompson pressed. "Above my pay grade," Anderson replied firmly. "Focus on the mission." Sarah noticed the exchange, but remained expressionless. She was used to confusion about her presence. Most people struggled to understand her role because it was unlike anything in normal military structure. She operated in spaces between official organizations, handling problems that regular forces couldn't touch. The afternoon sun grew hotter as final preparations began. Weapons were loaded with training ammunition. Radio checks confirmed clear communications between all units. Helicopter pilots warmed up their engines for the assault phase. Harrison gathered his SEAL team for their private briefing. "Listen up. We have point on the north entrance, fast and clean. No showboating for the international audience." His men nodded seriously. "What about the mystery woman?" Torres asked. "Should we be concerned about operational security?" Harrison glanced toward Sarah, who was now studying the mock embassy building through binoculars. "I don't know who she is, but someone important wants her here. Stay focused on the mission and ignore the distractions." As the teams moved into position, Sarah walked closer to the action area. She positioned herself where she could observe multiple approach routes. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, like someone who had spent years in combat zones. A young German soldier noticed her approach and called out in broken English, "Miss, you must stay back. This area is dangerous for civilians." Sarah smiled slightly but didn't respond. She simply adjusted her position to maintain clear sight lines while staying out of the way. The radio crackled with final countdown announcements. "All units, we are go for exercise commencement in T-5 minutes." Harrison checked his gear one last time. His team was ready. They had trained for months to work with international partners. This exercise would test everything they had learned about coordination and tactics. He looked once more toward the mysterious observer. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't identify what. She stood too comfortably in a military environment. Her posture suggested someone accustomed to high-stress situations. Most civilians would show some nervousness, but she appeared completely relaxed. 2 minutes to go," came the radio announcement. Sarah closed her eyes briefly and took a deep breath. The familiar sounds and smells of military preparation brought back thousands of memories. She had stood in similar positions on real battlefields where lives hung in the balance. This training exercise was child's play compared to some of the operations she had led. The countdown reached its final seconds. Across the field, elite soldiers from multiple nations prepared to demonstrate their skills in front of their peers and commanders. None of them suspected that the quiet woman they had mocked all morning possessed more combat experience than all of them combined. Execute, execute, execute! The exercise began with explosive force as teams stormed toward their objectives. Sarah watched with professional interest as the carefully planned operation unfolded. Soon, she knew, everything would change. But for now, she was content to observe and remember why she had chosen to step away from this world. The mock embassy erupted in controlled chaos as elite forces moved into position. Smoke grenades created gray clouds across the battlefield, while flashbangs echoed through the concrete structure. Harrison's SEAL team advanced through the North Corridor, their movements precise and coordinated. They had trained for this scenario dozens of times. Sarah watched from her observation point as the operation developed. Within minutes, she spotted the critical flaw the planners had missed. The terrorist actors had positioned themselves perfectly to create a crossfire trap in the main lobby. The approaching teams would walk directly into an ambush. Through her binoculars, she could see Harrison's team approaching the danger zone. The British SAS was moving in from the east, completely unaware of the trap waiting ahead. The German KSK unit advanced from the west, also blind to the tactical problem developing in front of them. "This is going to be a disaster," Sarah muttered under her breath. Major Anderson stood nearby with other observers, monitoring radio communications from all teams. The exercise controllers had carefully planned this scenario to test international cooperation under pressure. They wanted to see how well different units could coordinate when facing unexpected challenges. Sarah knew what was about to happen. In 30 seconds, 3 elite teams would converge on the lobby at exactly the same time. The terrorist actors would open fire from concealed positions, creating simulated casualties among some of the world's best soldiers. It would be embarrassing for everyone involved. She looked around for someone in authority who might listen to her warning, but she was just the mysterious civilian observer that everyone had been mocking all morning. No one would believe she could spot tactical problems that experienced military planners had missed. Harrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Bravo, team! We have visual on the main entrance. Moving to breach in 10 seconds. The British captain responded immediately. "Charlie team confirms. We'll provide cover from the eastern approach." The German commander added, "Delta team in position, ready to advance on your signal." Sarah realized she had to act. She couldn't watch good soldiers walk into a trap, even during a training exercise. Professional pride and years of combat experience wouldn't let her stay silent. She strode toward Major Anderson with determined steps. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant. The quiet, mysterious observer disappeared, replaced by someone who clearly expected to be obeyed without question. "Major, you need to stop this exercise immediately," she said with crisp authority. Anderson looked at her with surprise. "Excuse me? Ma'am, you're here to observe, not interfere. Your teams are about to walk into a crossfire trap in the main lobby. The terrorist positioning creates overlapping fields of fire that will simulate massive casualties," Sarah explained quickly. Anderson frowned. "Our planners spent months developing this scenario. I think they know what they're doing." "Your planners missed a critical tactical element. Look at positions Alpha 7 and Bravo 12 on your grid." Sarah pointed to specific locations on his map. "Cross-reference those with the approach vectors your teams are using." Anderson studied his clipboard, then looked at the map more carefully. His expression began to change as he realized she was absolutely right. The oversight was glaring once someone pointed it out. "How did you—" he started to ask. "Bravo, team! Breach, breach, breach!" Harrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. It was too late to stop them cleanly. Anderson grabbed his radio. All teams, hold position, exercise control, implement emergency pause." But the teams were already committed to their assault. Radio discipline during active operations meant they wouldn't stop unless they heard their direct commanders calling abort. The exercise control frequency was separate from tactical communications. Harrison burst through the main entrance with his team behind him. The British SAS came through the eastern door at exactly the same moment. The German KSK emerged from the western stairwell. All 3 teams found themselves in the lobby simultaneously, exactly as Sarah had predicted. The terrorist actors, played by experienced military personnel, opened fire with training weapons. Red laser beams and blank ammunition filled the air. According to exercise rules, multiple soldiers from each team were now simulated casualties. "Casualties, casualties!" called the exercise referees. "Bravo 2 and Bravo 4 are down. Charlie 3 and Charlie 6 are down. Delta 1 and Delta 5 are down." Harrison's frustration was obvious even over the radio. This was supposed to be a showcase of American special operations capabilities. Instead, his team had walked into an elementary tactical mistake. Anderson finally managed to halt the exercise. "All teams, exercise pause, exercise pause. Return to start positions for reset." The various units began withdrawing from the building, their mood significantly dampened. What should have been a smooth demonstration of international military cooperation had turned into an embarrassing failure. As the teams regrouped, word spread quickly about the tactical disaster. The SEALs, who had been mocking Sarah all morning, now looked confused and frustrated. Their elite team had been killed in a training exercise because of poor planning. Harrison emerged from the building with his jaw clenched tight. He had led successful operations against real enemies in actual combat zones. Being caught in a training trap felt humiliating, especially in front of Allied forces. Major Anderson approached him with obvious discomfort. "Commander, we need to debrief this situation. There was a planning oversight that created an impossible tactical scenario." "What kind of oversight?" Harrison demanded. Anderson glanced toward Sarah, who was standing nearby listening to the radio chatter. "The observer identified the problem before the exercise began. She tried to warn us, but the timing was too tight to abort cleanly." Harrison followed Anderson's gaze to the mysterious woman. For the first time all day, he really looked at her. Something about her posture and the way she held herself suggested extensive military background. Her eyes showed the kind of alert awareness that came only from real combat experience. "Who is she?" Harrison asked quietly. "I honestly don't know," Anderson admitted. "My orders came from NATO headquarters in Brussels. Highest level clearance, observe only. Ask no questions." Harrison walked over to where Sarah stood. She met his approach calmly, showing no signs of intimidation, despite facing an angry Navy SEAL commander. "Ma'am, I understand you identified the tactical problem before it developed," Harrison said with controlled politeness. "The crossfire trap was obvious once you analyzed the sightlines," Sarah replied simply. "Your teams are excellent, but the scenario setup was flawed." "You have military experience?" Harrison asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "Some." "What branch?" "It's complicated." Harrison studied her more carefully. Everything about her suggested professional military background, but he couldn't place her accent or identify any unit insignia. She spoke like an officer accustomed to command authority, yet she wore civilian clothes and carried no identification. The other team leaders had gathered around, equally curious about the mysterious observer who had spotted their tactical blindness. Captain Thompson from the British SAS looked particularly interested. "I must say your analysis was quite precise," Thompson said with his crisp accent. "Where did you develop that level of tactical awareness?" Sarah looked around at the circle of elite soldiers, studying her with new interest. These men represented the finest special operations forces in the world. They had earned their reputations through years of dangerous missions and rigorous training. Now they were looking at her with something approaching professional respect. But she knew that respect would turn to shock once they learned the truth about her background. For now, she preferred to remain the mysterious observer who had saved them from embarrassment. "Experience teaches many lessons," she said diplomatically. "Perhaps we should focus on resetting the exercise with better tactical parameters." Anderson nodded eagerly, grateful for any solution that might salvage the day's training. "We can adjust the terrorist positions to create a more balanced scenario." "Or," Sarah suggested quietly, "you could modify the approach vectors to avoid the natural kill zones while maintaining the coordination challenges you want to test." Harrison raised an eyebrow. She was offering specific tactical advice rather than general observations. That suggested she understood military planning at a level that went far beyond basic training. "Could you be more specific?" he asked. Sarah walked over to Anderson's map table. With quick, confident strokes, she sketched alternative approach routes that would maintain the exercise's difficulty while eliminating the impossible crossfire trap. The assembled commanders studied her modifications with growing surprise. Her tactical adjustments were sophisticated and clearly the work of someone with extensive operational experience. "This is brilliant," whispered the German KSK leader. "She's maintained our coordination requirements while creating multiple decision points that will test real tactical thinking." As Sarah finished her suggestions, she noticed that all conversation around the map table had stopped. Every elite soldier present was staring at her work with expressions of professional admiration mixed with puzzled confusion. She straightened up and stepped back from the map. Those adjustments should provide the training value you want while avoiding the tactical problems in the original plan. Harrison looked from the map to Sarah and back again. Ma'am, with respect, these modifications show the kind of operational understanding that takes years to develop, years in very specific circumstances. Sarah met his gaze steadily. She could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to piece together her background. Soon, someone would ask the right question or make the right connection. Then the morning's mockery and skepticism would transform into something very different. But for now, she was content to let them wonder. The afternoon was still young, and the exercise had yet to reveal its most important lessons. The revised exercise began with noticeably better coordination. Sarah's tactical modifications had transformed the scenario from an impossible trap into a challenging but achievable mission. The various international teams moved through their approaches with renewed confidence, testing their skills against realistic obstacles rather than predetermined failure. Harrison led his SEALs through the northern corridor, following the adjusted route Sarah had suggested. This time, they encountered meaningful resistance that required tactical thinking rather than walking into a slaughter. His respect for the mysterious observer's military knowledge continued to grow with each successful phase of the operation. As the exercise progressed, Major Anderson found himself watching Sarah more carefully. Her body language during the action phases told a story that her casual civilian appearance tried to hide. She anticipated tactical developments with uncanny accuracy, often turning to watch specific areas seconds before important events unfolded there. "She's reading this exercise like she wrote the playbook," Anderson muttered to his aide. The aide nodded nervously. "Sir, should we be concerned about operational security? She seems to understand our procedures better than some of our own people." Anderson didn't answer immediately. His orders regarding the mysterious observer had been unusually specific and came from levels of command he rarely dealt with directly. Someone very important wanted her here, and that someone had enough authority to override normal security protocols. The exercise reached its climactic phase as teams converged on the hostage location. Sarah's modifications had created a scenario requiring genuine coordination between different national units. The British SAS provided overwatch while the German KSK secured escape routes. Harrison's SEALs moved in for the final assault with backup from French commandos. Sarah watched with professional satisfaction as the operation unfolded exactly as she had envisioned. Each team played to their strengths while covering for others' weaknesses. This was how international military cooperation was supposed to work. "Exercise complete," announced the radio controller. "All objectives secured, all hostages recovered, minimal casualties." A cheer went up from the various teams as they emerged from the building. The afternoon's success had wiped away the morning's embarrassment. Soldiers from different nations congratulated each other in multiple languages, their earlier frustrations forgotten. Harrison approached Sarah as the teams began their post-exercise procedures. His earlier suspicion had evolved into genuine curiosity mixed with professional respect. "Ma'am, I need to ask directly. Your tactical knowledge is far beyond what any civilian observer should possess. Who are you really?" Sarah looked around at the celebrating soldiers. She had enjoyed watching them work together successfully. These men represented the best their nations had to offer, dedicated professionals who risked their lives to protect others. They deserved to know the truth. "Commander Harrison, what's your unit's radio call sign?" she asked calmly. Harrison looked puzzled by the question. "Bravo team, designation Navy 77. And Captain Thompson's team?" "Charlie team, call sign Union Jack 6. Sarah nodded. Radio call signs identify units and establish command authority. They tell everyone in the communication network exactly who they're talking to and what level of authority that person carries. Harrison wasn't sure where this conversation was leading. Yes, ma'am. That's basic military communications. My call sign was Phantom 1. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward, his face going completely pale. Around them, other conversations continued normally, but Harrison stood frozen in shock. Phantom 1 was a legend in special operations circles. For 8 years, that call sign had appeared in classified after-action reports from the most dangerous missions in the world. Hostage rescues that seemed impossible. Terrorist leaders eliminated against overwhelming odds. Intelligence operations that changed the course of entire conflicts. Phantom 1 had been a ghost, operating in the spaces between official military units and intelligence agencies. No one knew Phantom 1's real identity, nationality, or even gender. The call sign appeared in mission reports, then vanished again like smoke. Harrison had heard stories about Phantom 1 throughout his career. Every special operations soldier had heard the stories. They were whispered in classified briefing rooms and shared during late-night conversations between trusted comrades. The mission in Sarajevo, where a single operator had rescued 12 hostages from a building surrounded by hostile forces. The intelligence operation in Damascus that had prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. The elimination of a weapons dealer in Somalia that had saved hundreds of lives. All of those legendary missions carried the same mysterious signature. Phantom 1. That's impossible, Harrison whispered. Is it? Sarah asked quietly. Other commanders had noticed Harrison's strange reaction and began moving closer to hear the conversation. Captain Thompson arrived first, followed by the German and French team leaders. Harrison, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost, Thompson said with concern. Harrison couldn't take his eyes off Sarah. She says her call sign was Phantom 1. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Thompson went rigid with shock. The German commander dropped his tactical folder. The French leader actually stepped backward as if he had been struck. Every special operations soldier in the world knew about Phantom 1. The mystery operator had become a legend, the subject of countless speculation and analysis. Intelligence agencies had spent years trying to identify the person behind that call sign. Phantom 1 is a myth, Thompson said weakly. A compilation of different missions attributed to one fictional operator. Sarah smiled sadly. I wish that were true. It would have made my life much simpler. Major Anderson had joined the group, drawn by the unusual tension. He looked around at the circle of elite soldiers, staring at the quiet woman in civilian clothes. Someone want to explain what's happening here? Anderson asked. Harrison found his voice first. Sir, she claims to be Phantom 1. Anderson looked blank. Should that mean something to me? Phantom 1 executed the most dangerous special operations missions of the last decade, Thompson explained with awe in his voice. Missions that were impossible for regular military units. The call sign appears in classified files across multiple agencies and nations. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather folder. She opened it briefly, showing a collection of ID cards and credentials that made Harrison's eyes widen even further. The hostage rescue in Belgrade, Harrison said quietly. The weapons cache destruction in Libya, the extraction of intelligence assets from North Korea. That was really you? Along with about 60 other operations you've never heard of, Sarah confirmed. The circle of elite soldiers stood in stunned silence. They had spent the morning mocking a woman who possessed more combat experience than all of them combined. She had led missions they could only dream about, faced dangers they had never imagined, and achieved results that had shaped international security for years. Why did you stop? Thompson asked reverently. Sarah's expression grew distant. 8 years of living in the shadows, 8 years of having no identity except a radio call sign, 8 years of missions where failure meant death and success meant disappearing back into nothing. She looked around at their faces, seeing the mixture of admiration and disbelief. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be a real person instead of a ghost. "But why are you here? Why observe this exercise?" the German commander asked. "Because I missed it," Sarah admitted. "I missed watching good soldiers work together. I missed the satisfaction of complex operations executed perfectly. I missed being part of something bigger than myself." Anderson slowly began to understand. "The orders to include you came from NATO Command. They wanted you to evaluate our international cooperation protocols." Sarah nodded. "Someone thought my experience might provide useful insights into how Allied forces can work together more effectively." Harrison shook his head in amazement. "We spent all morning making jokes about you being a tourist. You were probably analyzing our weaknesses and planning improvements before we even started the exercise." "Your teams are excellent," Sarah said sincerely. "You just needed better tactical parameters to showcase your abilities properly." A long silence fell over the group as each man processed the revelation. They had been in the presence of a living legend without realizing it. The mysterious woman they had dismissed was one of the most accomplished special operations soldiers in the world. "Will you consider coming back?" Harrison asked hopefully. "The military could use someone with your experience." Sarah smiled but shook her head. Phantom One was retired for good reasons, but Sarah Mitchell might be willing to help with training and planning from time to time. Thompson grinned widely. "Sarah Mitchell. So that's your real name?" "One of them," Sarah replied mysteriously. "I had several identities over the years. Sarah Mitchell is the one I chose to keep when I decided to become a real person again." As the sun began to set over the NATO facility, the various teams completed their equipment cleanup and final debriefings. Word of Phantom One's identity spread quickly through the ranks, transforming the day from a routine training exercise into a moment of military history. Sarah watched the soldiers preparing to depart, feeling a mix of nostalgia and satisfaction. She had stepped back into her old world briefly and found that she could still contribute without losing herself in the shadows. Harrison approached her one final time. "Ma'am, speaking for all of us, it's been an honor. Thank you for the tactical advice and for trusting us with the truth." "Thank you for reminding me why I love this work," Sarah replied. "Take care of yourselves out there. The world needs soldiers like you." As the military vehicles departed the training facility, Sarah remained behind for a few minutes. She looked out across the empty field where she had spent the morning being mocked and dismissed. By afternoon, those same soldiers had been seeking her advice and treating her with the respect her achievements had earned. The transformation reminded her why she had chosen to step away from the Phantom One identity. She wanted to be valued for who she was as a complete person, not just for her ability to complete impossible missions. But today had also reminded her that her experience and knowledge still had value. Perhaps there was a way to contribute to military effectiveness without disappearing back into the world of shadows and call signs. As she walked toward the parking area, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "This is Sarah Mitchell," she said when the call connected. "I think it's time we discussed that consulting position you offered." The voice on the other end sounded pleased but not surprised. "I was wondering when you'd call. When can you start?" Sarah looked back once more at the training facility where elite soldiers had learned to work together more effectively because of her guidance. "Soon," she said with a smile. "Very soon."